Hey Jack Adventures, Terry King here. Welcome to the channel and welcome to another episode in the FJ45 restomod build. Today we're going to talk about rear handbrakes and the diff dance that I've had to do to get to a final solution for a handbrake on the rear axle of this car. If you've got yourself an early model cruiser, particularly a 74 model or earlier, this is something that you're going to want to listen to. Come on along with me on the journey and you'll be able to learn exactly what I've learned, but you won't need to do it the hard way. You can do it from the comfort of your lounge chair. Let's get stuck into it. Now the original handbrake on this vehicle was on the transfer case. Obviously, because I'm selling the motor, I've got no handbrake now. So that means I need to put it on the back axle or work out one of these tail shaft handbrakes onto my existing car. And for me, probably the easier of the two is a back axle handbrake. With the early model FJ Cruisers, you've got a semi-floating rear axle. And if you have a look here, you can see the difference between that and this, which is a full floating. Your rim bolts up here against that face, and that actually protrudes a fair distance past the rim. And that's how you can tell the difference really quickly between a full floating rear end and a semi-floating rear end. So why is that a big deal? I'm going to be using backing plates off a 60 Series Cruiser so that I can use the 60 Series handbrake. On a full floating rear end, there are 4 bolts holding the backing plate on. So what that means for this rear end is I can take this backing plate off, which is off of an FJ45, a late model FJ45. Take this backing plate off, bolt up a 60 Series backing plate, got my handbrake. With the early model Cruisers, a semi-floating rear end, you've actually got a 6-bolt backing plate. And the 60 Series, or the 75 Series for that matter, does not bolt directly up to this diff housing. So that was a major pain in the backside, because what that meant was the diff that came with the car I actually had to replace with a later model FJ45 diff so that I could bolt my 60 Series backing plates that have a handbrake onto that diff. A little bit of running around, but I got there in the end. What I'm going to do is rebuild this diff in preparation for the 60 Series or 75 Series backing plates. They're both the same, but rebuild this diff in preparation to putting those on. So the first thing we'll do is drain the diff fluid. It's a little bit milky, so that lends me to believe that a little bit of water might have got in there. Small amount of shavings on the magnetic plug, but nothing more than what I've seen in prior diffs. Okay, we're going to pull this rear hub apart. In fact, I could take the entire backing plate and hub off for a complete rebuild. These brake shoes are brand spanking new, as is that brake cylinder. So I'm hopeful that the hub will be reasonably easy to pull off because it won't be crusted in there, but we'll see. Now for these magical cone washers. Ooh, not a fan of them at all. Doesn't look like this hub has been pounded to death, so maybe they haven't been out. These little cone washers are like the devil incarnate. They can be an absolute bugger to get out. I've tried many different ways, and I've never had a way that works perfectly. You can try tapping the hub here, and sometimes it pops them out. You can try tapping the axle with a punch on the face. Sometimes that pops them out. You can try tapping on these studs. Sometimes that pops them out. But I've never had one foolproof way of getting them. So if somebody's got a foolproof way, I would love to hear that. Throw that down in the comment section for me. 1 down. 12 to go. 6 on this side, 6 on the other side. Well, after a significant amount of whacking and hammering and smacking, I got down to 1 cone washer left over. Could not get that sucker out, so I ran the 2 bolts in that pull the axle out, and the axle's actually starting to creep out a little bit. So that might be my ticket out of here to crack that last cone washer. And it does look like she's coming. Yep, she's definitely coming. Okay, let me pull these 2 bolts out of here, knock that axle back in, and hopefully that cone washer stay out. And it does not. It goes back in with the whole kit and caboodle. Okay, then I'll just keep pulling that axle out. Screw you, Mr. Cone Washer. And look at that, that freaking cone washer is still stuck in there, right to the dying end. Far out. All right, that's the short side axle shaft out. Let's move on to our hub. All right, inside this hub are 2 Phillips head screws, which lock this ring in. And they're very tough. Nothing about taking this axle apart is easy. Far out. I have never had this fun in games before. Far out. These 2 locking screws here, which typically come out really easy, I couldn't even get those out with an impact driver. And now they're all stripped in the face. So I'm gonna have to drill those suckers out. Unbelievable. So I've come over to the other side because I just cannot get those 2 bolts out on that side. And if I come over here, look at how easy these things come out. That's how they're meant to go. That other side, I have never seen anything like that before. And once that's done, just simply spins off. Easy as pie. So the reason I've come over to this side, just to have a look at what's behind this, see whether it'll give me any clues to getting the other side off. That hub comes off with the bearings, and that is the issue that I've got on the other side. Because I've drilled it out, I'd say the little end of that bolt is still sitting inside of there, locking that sucker. As you can see, it sits up in this keyway here. So maybe I can get a magnet in there and just get the tip of that bolt out of there. Let me give that a crack. Well, I finally got it. And there's the little bit, just that little tiny end of the screw that was sticking in there, holding me up. Unbelievable. There's a little bit of metal shavings on those threads from my drilling. Hence, this is a little bit difficult to come out. But once I've got that all cleaned up, she'll be fine. Got it. What an absolute cow to get off. I've never had it that difficult before. And off comes the hub. Just like that. Now we'll pop this inner axle seal out. Just like that. Now we pull our brake backing plate off. Yeah, just like that. All right, breaker bar time. Whew. Got them cracked. All right, only that one to go, which is spinning on the back side. Let's check that out. So they're actually bolts. We'll pop that on the back side, and this on the front. That's it. The backing plate should just bash off now. And there we have it. Backing plate, seal, with no rubber left on it. Awesome. Now, time to go and rebuild these hubs. So I've got brand new coil bearings, brand new seals, axle oil seals, gaskets of course, complete new stud kit, new evil cone washers, and the rear seals that go onto the back of the backing plate. So let's rebuild a hub. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull these studs out, because I've got replacement ones in the kit. And it's a lot easier to clean that face up when these studs are not in your road as well. So to do this, if you watch my video on the front hubs rebuild, you would have seen this technique used already. But if you haven't, this is how you do it. Now you lock these two together, and then once they're locked together, you back the stud out. And you just undo the stud using those nuts that you've got locked together. Again, the same as the front. The long side, long threads go into the hub. The short side sticks proud. Once you got your stud out, you unlock those bolts from one another, and you rinse and repeat 5 more times. Once I've got all of these studs out, it's time to pull these two pins, these axle locating pins out. You can leave them in there, but I've got replacement ones in the kit, so for that reason I'll replace them. They're just sort of pressed in there. Just a small little stud. Okay, time to flip the hub over. And on this back side is an oil seal. And this one is crusty and leaking. Just use whatever implement you've got to pop it out. Just like that. In the bin. Once you got the oil seal out, you can pop out your one bearing. And the other one's obviously already come out when we pulled the hub off. Now the last thing to do is knock our races out. And you can see there's a little detent there. And there's another one on the opposite side. So we just take our punch, knock it a bit there, knock it a bit there, bit there, bit there, until that race is driven out. That's it, the race is out. Now just keep that little sucker because we're going to use that to drive the new races back in. The other race on the other side, exactly the same procedure. You'll find those two tabs, just keep knocking it side to side and she'll come out. Now I've got my hubs all cleaned up and I'm going to paint them obviously. But before I paint them, I think I'm actually going to drive the races in. Because you got to hit them with a reasonable amount of force. And I don't want to chip all that paint that I would have just done when I've got this thing locked in the vise to drive this race in. So let's do that next. I'm going to put a thin bit of grease on the outside of the race before I drive it in. And just a thin bit of grease on the inside of the hub where the race is going to sit. So grease to grease basically. Now I'm going to start to drive this race into the hub, and you'll see when I'm striking it, I'm actually not striking it on the face, but I'm hitting it here where the bearing actually will not run. And that's about as far as I can go with a hammer. That's where your original race comes in. So I'm going to use the short edge or the skinny edge, and I'm going to tap it in a little bit further, but I'm going to stop before this gets stuck in there. You can see now it's down below the hub. Now that race is just starting to get stuck in that hub, so I'm going to stop at that point, I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to drive it home the rest of the way in this orientation. And the reason for that will come clear in a second. Now that race is now down as far as it can go, so it's time to grab a punch. Now I don't know whether that came through in the camera on the audio or not, but when that race seats into the bottom of the hub, the note changes. So just keep your ears peeled for that note. But that's now driven down as far as she's going to go. And now I flip the hub over and you can see that the other race is now sitting proud. And that'll allow me to get the punch in there and get a bite of the old race to be able to knock it out. And you can see there, right there, where I'll be knocking that old race out. And out she comes. And it won't take a whole lot of effort. That's it. It's out. There's our race. We flip him over, wipe out our grease, and you can see the face of that race is completely undamaged. We didn't hit it with a punch or anything. So that's the backyard way that I've learned how to knock races in and out. Time to reassemble these hubs. So I've got all our studs back in. Got these two axle locating pins in. The races have been driven in, as you saw a little bit earlier. Now I'm going to grease up the inside of that hub, install the bearings, and then install the oil seal. Don't need a whole lot of grease in here, I don't believe. I'll pack it basically level with those two races, bearing races. There we go. Put a bit of grease on that bearing race. Put a little bit of grease where that seal's going to run. Here's kind of a yucky job if you've never done it before, and that's packing bearings. Packing bearings manually. So you grab yourself a bit of grease, pop it in the palm of your hand, and then you simply start squeezing it into the bearing, into this open side, not this closed side. And as you're doing this, you can see that it starts to sort of creep out the other side. Once you've done that, you move on to another section and do it again. And you do that for all 4 bearings. There are bearing packers, sort of automated bearing packers. I've never actually used one before, but for the amount of bearings that I've packed, I probably should have looked into it. Anyway, this works just fine. Just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of gooiness. There we have it. That bearing is packed. Now we'll just goo it up a little bit and drop them inside of his race. Alright, our bearing's in. Now we'll just knock our seal in. Just going to put a light bit of grease around the outside here to help it slide in. Some people put Loctite on this, but I've never really found that necessary. I'm not hitting on the face of the seal, I'm hitting on the edge of it. And that's it, she's run down. Put a little bit of grease on the inside of the seal in case I forget to do that when I install it. Flip our hub over, drop in our smaller bearing. That's it. That hub is ready to be reinstalled back onto the car. Now what we've got here, this is the backing plate off of my 45 series. And there's a couple of standout features. One, there's no handbrake on here, and this is the whole reason that I'm doing it. And 2, we've got our 4-bolt axle. Now this is a backing plate off of a really early 80 series, the first couple of years of production. 4-bolt backing plate, which bolts up quite nicely. But here's what I'm after, this handbrake mechanism. Now I'm just looking at these 2 units together, and these brake shoes look pretty bloody close. So I think if I can get that pin out of that brake shoe and locate it here into this brake shoe, and then just transfer all of this brake componentry, which is brand new, over to this 80 series backing plate, I think I've got myself a handbrake. On the flip side, you can see here's the actuator mechanism for the handbrake. And on the 45 series, of course, no actuator because there is no handbrake. But those backing plates are pretty much identical, except for that little unit there. If I can swap these over, it'll be a big win because this is brand new brake componentry in here. Brand new shoes, brand new wheel cylinders. So that's what I'll do. I'll take that brake shoe off and I'll see whether I can swap that pin over into that shoe there. Well, there's my first difference. I've taken that spring off the 80 series and it's got one of these little clips or clamps on the top side and on the bottom side, and on my 45 it only had it on the top side. I suspect it used to have it on the bottom, but that's probably long since lost. Alright, that's the little pin I'm after right there. Look at that, just knocked straight out. And it does fit in that hole. Beautiful. So I can use these shoes and swap them over onto that 80 series backing plate. That is sensational. One tool I found super useful for getting these little guys off, because normally you just use a pair of pliers, but I bought this some time ago, and it's got little serrations in the inside of it that kind of grab a hold of that. And you can see through the hole here when you're spinning it. And they're just a brilliant little thing. Pretty specialist, I know, but for, well, I don't know, 10 bucks or something like that, it's not a bad little investment. There's the difference between our 2 backing plates. That one pre-blast cabinet, that one post-blast cabinet. Moral of the story, get a blast cabinet. They're awesome. Backing plate's cleaned up. All the parts are now cleaned, and we're ready to reassemble this sucker. So let's give it a crack. First thing I'm gonna do, put on this wheel cylinder. Put a little bit of anti-seize on these bolts. Now we'll put our little nipple onto our brake bleeder. Now before I go assembling any of the brake componentry, I've got to put this handbrake puppy in here first. Now the reason I got to put that in first is if you load your shoes up onto the backing plate, you can't actually get to that one bolt. And if you're saying, Terry, there's two different size heads on those bolts, you'd be absolutely right. But that's what they came with. So somebody's had it off in the past. Now these two springs clip on there like so. And that hook goes down into that hole. That wasn't too bad. And this little puppy here lays in the opposite direction. Now here's something I noted when I was taking this sucker apart. These seals were stuck behind the shoes. So that being the case, I gotta make sure, especially if you're assembling these on the bench, you put that seal in there first. Because once these brake shoes go on, and all the springs and everything are attached, you can't actually get that seal in there. So if you're assembling this on the bench, seal goes first. Don't forget that sucker, or you'll be undoing everything you did. Okay, so these little suckers assemble. Flat facing down, spring, flat facing up, and then the pin runs up through the back of the backing plate. Get our handy dandy twisty tool. There's a little detent in there that pin sits in. Alright, that shoe's pinned in. Now, that big hoojonga spring has got to get over to there. Okay, let's see if we can just stretch you. Now we got a spring down here. Oh, that's a tough little sucker. Whew. Where'd you go, spring? I think maybe I should have put him on the shoes right at the very beginning. I think I gotcha. Gotcha. I think when I do the other side, I'll put that spring in first, because that was more difficult than I think it needed to be. Okay, handbrake componentry. A bit of anti-seize there. A little puppy goes there. That spring washer and a circlip. Doke. Now our handbrake cable. There we have it. Those shoes are all installed. And you can see you can't actually get that oil seal out of there. That one's finished. We'll go on to the other side. And there we have it. Right side and left side completely rebuilt. Brand new drums, ready to go back onto the car. Last step, however, before I reinstall those hubs and the brakes, is I'm going to pull this diff center out and I'm going to check the state of it. I'll have a look at the gears, see if they're worn or not, and I've got a dial gauge and I'll measure the backlash as well, just to make sure that everything's sort of within tolerance and spec. It'd be a shame not to pull it out, given the fact that I've got it this far already. A few bolts around the center of the pumpkin, off she comes. Diff center's out, and have a look at what I found here. The diff case has taken a whack here on the back side, and it's pushed that diff out into the crown wheel. So let's go have a look at that crown wheel and see whether we've got any damage on it. So here's our crown wheel, and I can't see any damage there. And that's it, she looks pretty good. Well, that's a bit of a relief. So I got myself a bit of a wooden dowel here, and I'm just gonna try and pop that out a little bit. Not sure if the camera will show that well or not, but that dent did get punched out a little bit. So I'm sitting here with the dial gauge getting ready to set up the backlash on this diff. And you know, I got to thinking, do I really want an open center in the back of this car? If I'm on the bitumen where this is primarily going to be, and I put my foot down, I just don't want one tire to light up. They need to both light up in unison. So what I'm going to do is investigate a limited slip diff, or perhaps some sort of a locking diff, like a Walkrite, in the back of this thing, just so I can light both tires up at the same time. So I'm going to forget about adjusting the backlash on this right now, and I'm going to move on. Diff all painted and back on the chassis stands. Now it's time to pop these backing plates and brakes on and get some wheels fitted to this thing. First thing I'm going to do is top these new inner axle seals in. There is the part number, 90310 3500 1. Put a small amount of grease on the inside of the axle. And pop this little puppy in. There we have it. Now I'll put a bit of grease on that seal in case I forget to later on. Okay, backing plate time. Here's something I prepared earlier. Here we have it. One backing plate installed. Now time for the hub. What I'll do is I'll grease this up and grease this stub axle up. Now we pop on our hub, which we greased earlier, obviously. Then pop in this washer, which is brand new, because if you recall, I had to drill this sucker out. See that little tang there? Runs right along the top of the axle, like so. And then this little puppy, which is also brand new again, for the same reasons. Had to drill that sucker out. I've also got this fancy little tool here, which goes in like so and allows me to tighten that sucker down with a ratchet as opposed to a cold chisel knocking it around. Tighten this down, and I'm basically going by feel on this one. And then these screws basically go in there wherever you can locate them in the back of that washer. Nope, that is not seating in a hole. So we got to make slight adjustments in one direction or another. That is a yes. That one will also be a yes. There we have it. Now I think what I will do is just pop the axle in there. I'm not going to crank these cone washers down at all because I'll need to pull that diff back out of there to rebuild it again. But at least if I pop the axle in there, it'll help keep the dust out of there. And then we'll slide our short side axle in there just after I grease that up. And when you're sliding it in, you don't want to rest it on that rubber seal at all. There we go, that's closed up enough to keep the dust out. Very good, that's all buttoned up as far as I can take it. Last thing to do is pop the brake drum on. There we have it. One FJ45 rear diff with 80 series backing plates and handbrake installed. Wonderful. Rinse and repeat on the other side and call it a day. Well, I trust you found some use in this particular video. Thanks for watching, everybody, and following along. I really do sincerely appreciate it. Until next video, keep the shiny side up. Have a good one, everybody. Bye now.